People are afraid, well, if I do this in this area, this could affect me in other areas. Then I'm back to the tariff punishment. Do something that is in our interest that the United States doesn't like and will be punished in other ways. That could go on for a little while longer, but they're getting pretty close out in Central East Europe, frankly, to beginning to ask the question, how do we benefit from a state of permanent hostility to Russia?
Well, I'll tell you somebody else who benefits from a permanent state of hostility, and that's represented by the retired four-star general who went on TV to talk today, or rather last night, Jack Keane.
But what the stumbling block is Putin's offer. I mean, it took us a couple of days to figure out what it really is. And what his offer is he wants Zelensky to give up territory. Putin's giving up nothing.
Yeah.
And he'll freeze the war and the rest of it. And President Zelensky, and that territory that Putin wants to give up is critical military territory in the Donetsk Oblast.
Yeah.
And by that, I mean, it's called the fortified belt. 5 cities, a 50-mile line along Highway 20. Putin has been trying to take it since 2014, Ashley. For the last 2 years, he has been trying to take it and has not been able to do it. For Ukraine to give it to him, gift it to him, a conciliatory move would be an absurdity.
Speaking of an absurdity, it's absurd to be making that comment because he's basically saying Russia sucks. They're no good. As Russia is making a 10 and then now almost up to 20-kilometer penetration in the very areas he said they suck and they can't do anything. And he's advocating, don't gift anything, just keep going. But I mean, from what you're talking of, this is not surprising to you.
Oh, no, not at all. And he's saying what's on offer. It's nothing new. Putin's position has not changed. So the notion that something new is on offer, I think these are misinterpretations disseminated by President Trump, who I think often misinterprets what he hears. I think President Trump is like a lot of leaders. He hears something and then he twists it to think, oh, he gets it, he understands, and he knows what I really want. I think that's part and parcel of the whole thing. Nothing has changed, except that the Russians are now advancing at higher speed, more deeply into Ukraine. And the Russians are not giving anything up. And there's nothing that we can do about that, short of going to war. And I'm sure that's probably in the back of General Keene's mind. And it's fine if he wants to risk a global confrontation with the Russians, which would undoubtedly become global and eventually would go nuclear. That's fine. I don't think we are. I don't think any of our allies in Europe really want that either. So at the end of the day, his comments are irrelevant. They don't make any sense.
Well, it does seem that a lot of people listen to him. It seems to reflect a lot of the European thing. But you mentioned a minute ago about what Trump is expectations are and what he wants to get out of this, what he wants to get out of this. One of the things he doesn't want to get out of this and apparently wants to get away from is Volodymyr Zelensky. He went on yesterday and was talking about, he was asked a question at a press conference, are you going to try to get Zelensky into this meeting in Alaska? Here's how that went.
Volodymyr Zelensky is not invited on Friday?
He wasn't a part of it. I would say he could go, but he's gone to a lot of meetings. He's been there for 3.5 years. Nothing happened.
And what is the definition?
I mean, do you want somebody that's been doing this for 3.5 years? What's the definition of a good deal? I'll tell you after I hear what the deal is, because there could be many definitions. You're talking about a very large and complex situation. Now, I tell you, the war that I just settled with Azerbaijan and with, as you know, and Armenia was almost as complex as this one, having to do with routes, trade.
Meeting on Friday with Vladimir Putin.
Well, we're going to have a meeting with Vladimir Putin, and at the end of that meeting, probably in the first 2 minutes, I'll know exactly whether or not a deal can be
How will
made.
you know that?
Because that's what I do. I make deals.
So I'm sorry, Doug, before you even comment there, that's what I do. I make deals, except in the same press conference, he also said this.
So I'm going to go and see the parameters. Now, I may leave and say, good luck, and that'll be the end. I may say this is not going to be settled. I mean, there are those that believe that Putin wanted all of Ukraine. I happen to be one of them, by the way. I think if it weren't for me, he would not be even talking to anybody else right now. So I'm then going to call up President Zelensky and the European leaders right after the meeting. Yeah. And I'm going to tell them what kind of a deal. I'm not going to make a deal. It's not up to me to make a deal.
Wait a minute. It's not up to me to make a deal, or that's what I do. I make deals. What do you make of that?
Well, the Azeri-Armenian deal, quote unquote, is not meaningful. First of all, the parliaments of those respective countries have to approve of the so-called deal that was signed in Washington with Trump, Aliyev, and Pashinyan. That's not going to be easy. In fact, I'm not sure it will happen at all. Secondly, that deal has now been denounced, of course, by the Iranians, who see this as another attempt to encircle Iran, effectively as an act of war. Finally, the Russians, who still have troops on the ground in Armenia, by the way, have viewed this with considerable sort of curiosity, since they were the ones that were initially asked to go into this corridor. This is before they renamed the Zangzur corridor, the Trump corridor of prosperity, influence, and perpetual peace, or whatever the hell it is. So I would dismiss out of hand that whole nonsensical thing. I don't think it has any staying power. And that's the other issue. What's our staying power, ours as Americans, in all of these distant places? It's weaker now than it has been, certainly in 50 years. And if Eisenhower were president, he would have said, "You're out of your minds. We can't possibly manage it. We can't run it. We can't protect it. Good luck." Remember, Eisenhower was the man that wanted to neutralize as many of the states in Eastern Europe as possible, because he said we could never possibly defend them. So that's one of the reasons you got the Austrian State Treaty. The Austrians did the negotiating, but Eisenhower supported and said, "Yeah, we can't defend Austria against the Soviets. Impossible." So I don't think President Trump is aware of any of that. And I think he will always declare anything that has a picture of him on it as a huge success story. That's his nature. That's marketing. That's how you make money in New York City. Whether or not it's real is absolutely unimportant. Finally, he's going to talk to the Europeans. That's fine. What difference will that make? Well, it could make some difference, because our experience with President Trump is that he's influenced by the last people he spoke with. And the Europeans certainly know how to coddle him, how to make him feel good about himself, how to flatter him. So they could persuade him of all sorts of things before he goes into that meeting. I would hope not, but I'm afraid that's true. And that's the problem with who commands NATO. And I think NATO is essentially a herd of cats, and the cats wander off in any particular direction they want at any given point in time. Now, some of the cats further east and south are afraid. And so they listen carefully, and they're trying desperately to do what they think we want them to. But they're beginning to wonder about the wisdom of it, doing anything we say. I mean, if you're in Poland or Slovakia or Hungary, do you want to open your borders and allow millions of people into your country to do what has happened in France or Great Britain or Germany, which makes your crime rates sort of skyrocket and destroys the cohesion of your society? I don't think they're fools. And I think the people on the borders right now looking into Ukraine, at some point they're going to say, wait a minute, what are you going to do? We can't go on like this. And as far as Ukraine is concerned, what is the attachment to Zelensky? He says, well, he's been there for 3.5 years. He hasn't made any deals. He's only got one deal. He was picked up by oligarchs, billionaire oligarchs, that put him in there, along with the help of Kagan and Blinken and all sorts of other people, go all the way back to 2014. These people want something that can't happen, the destruction of Russia. So we have on one pole the European wish, which is really the globalist last gasp of globalism, that wants to see Europe destroyed as a European civilization and doesn't give a damn about us. And on the other pole are the Russians, who are not going to be destroyed. Now, how do you make a compromise between these two groups? The globalists, who are pushing this war and dragging us into it, and the Russians, who desperately want an end to the war, but they can't end it unless they can be certain that a future government in Ukraine will not emerge to rekindle the war and kill them. I mean, remember this, these are the people that found the 23 biolabs, where they discovered all of this research designed to murder Slavs. I mean, come on, this is not a minor issue if you're a Russian. Ukrainians, they haven't come clean on this. They can't. They would be hauled, if there were a real international court of justice, they'd be in a lot of trouble. Today, I was reading accounts of the numbers of people being murdered in towns and villages that the Russians are overrunning, that are no longer being defended. Who's killing these people and why? Are these Ukrainians that have said we're not going to fight? Stalin murdered 1 million Soviet soldiers who said we're not fighting. And there were another 1 million Soviet soldiers, Russians and Ukrainians, who fought with the Germans. That's 2 million people. Now, that was a different time, but what I'm saying is I'm seeing these Stalinist approaches in Kiev. That's what they're behaving like. Was this the SBU, the secret police that murders people on the way out? Because that's the kind of thing the NKVD did all the time. So if you're a Russian right now looking at this, I think your expectations of anything good coming out of Alaska are very, very low.
Well, and I'm sorry, one of the reasons why they might be, those expectations on the Russian side might be lower is, and hearkening back to what you said a second ago about the last person in the room to talk to Trump, one of the last people who may be in the room is one of his golfing buddies, Lindsey Graham, who they apparently go and play golf all the time. And Graham's been one of his biggest supporters. He yesterday really, on Jesse Waters, I think last night, was really enthusiastic about what he thinks Trump should do in Alaska.
What would a good deal look like? Keep helping the Ukrainian military sell weapons to Europe to help Ukraine. That's good for our economy, and that's a form of deterrence. President Trump negotiated a hundreds of billions of dollars deal, over $1 trillion of critical minerals to be mined in Ukraine. We get half of it. Set up American business interests in Ukraine. That's a form of deterrence. Have the Europeans guarantee Ukraine's security, and if Putin invades again, he'll be fighting the coalition of the willing, just not Ukraine. And a guy like me can help too. I will create pre-invasion sanctions that will crush Russia if there's a third invasion.
I mean, I hesitate to even put that up there because it's such a clown-like situation. But I mean, he's number one. He's talking to Trump all the time. He's on major television all the time. I mean, he lives there. I don't know why the microphones love him so much in this country. But I mean, that may be more detached from reality than what anybody else is saying.
Well, he's AIPAC's darling, and he's the defense complex's darling. So he's got a lot of money pouring into him from various sources that want him to behave and say what he's doing. That's all. I'm very uncomfortable with what I call government by golf cart. We have all of these presidents. I remember watching W. He stepped off the golf course to make a comment about some soldiers that were just killed. Then he went back onto the green and continued putting away. I've seen President Trump get out of his golf cart, walk over, talk to people, then get back in the golf cart and drive away. I don't like it. Golf to me represents this ruling political class in Washington that is inherently corrupt and completely divorced from the American people and the reality of anything on the battlefield. These are all people whose children will never serve. These are people who send other people's children to war to die in places that are of at most marginal interest to us as a great power. So you've got to understand that I feel personal distaste for people like this. I don't like it. I'm sick of it. I want to see it end. That said, everything he said was absurd. It makes no sense at all. It's all part of the big lie. It reminds me of General Westmoreland traveling all over the country, all through 1967, 68, telling everybody we've turned the corner. We're on the winning side now. Sort of like Petraeus in Iraq.
Yeah.
Same sort of business.
In Afghanistan.
And then what did we get? We got the Tet Offensive. Everyone's embarrassed. The American public then, I think, was a little more conscious of what was happening because we had lost thousands of people in Vietnam. In other words, the American public itself was emotionally invested in what was happening. Right now, the American public doesn't appear to be remotely invested in Iraq, or excuse me, in Ukraine or anywhere else, because we haven't lost people that they can point to as their own.
Yeah.
That's a big problem. So people like Lindsey Graham, he can go to his people at home, and I've been in South Carolina, great people. I love them. But there are a lot of people there willing to say, well, we got to bomb those men. We got to bomb these people. Why? Do you know any of them? Have you ever been there? Do you know anything about it? And the answer, of course, Dan, is no. But there's a predisposition, and this has developed over the last 30 years. It's developed since Desert Storm. Remember, the Gulf War was this big victory, and everybody above us was surprised. We weren't, because we knew the quality of the soldiers and the sergeants, lieutenants, captains, warrants, and the equipment, but everybody above us was really surprised. Well, the politicians in Washington were surprised and said, great, now we can take this force anywhere we want to go. And I actually sat with members on the Hill that told me, well, thank goodness we don't have a draft anymore. Nobody cares what happens as long as you don't lose too many people in one day. And I sort of sat there, and I was in uniform, and I sat across from this congressman who said it. I said, well, that's interesting. It's good to know that if I should be killed next week,
It won't be a problem for you.
Sleep over it. Obviously, I think that's part of the problem too. And there's no understanding of our playing with fire. And this is the final thing that needs to be kept in mind. When you look at people in Moscow, the man who understands the most about the West and is most inclined to work with the West is Vladimir Putin. Now, once you move away from him, the attitude there is very much Dostoevsky's back in the 1870s and 80s. Dostoevsky reached a conclusion: Europeans don't regard us as Europeans. The Europeans don't like us. They treat us badly. We've wasted a lot of blood and treasure on Europe. We are at least as Asiatic as we are European. We should focus elsewhere. Well, that was Dostoevsky, and that's what, not 200 years ago, but 150. That's the attitude in Moscow increasingly. That's why these threats of sanctions and everything else, they don't mean anything anymore. They can get around those. They've understood that, and they're building parallel institutions. The Russians, the Chinese, the Indians, the Brazilians, all these states are beginning to develop a parallel system. And what you're ending up with, again, is a split in the world between the United States, North America, you could say, but principally us and Europeans, West Europeans primarily, and the rest of the world. I mean, it's kind of astonishing when you stop and think about it. And nobody seems to understand or appreciate any of that in the United States. And he's talking about all these mineral resources. Well, we knew that Russia, before this war even began, probably had somewhere between 40 and 50 trillion dollars, in resources, mineral resources, oil, gas, timber, everything. It wasn't just what's in the Donbass or the Donetsk Basin. The entire country of Russia. All of a sudden now, we're being told we have to fight for what's in Donetsk and Luhansk in the Donbass Basin, and we can't let the Russians have this. Oh, wait a minute, that's like the Russians saying, "Well, we need to go back into Alaska and get access to all that oil and gas and all the mineral wealth that's in Alaska, because we just can't let those Yankees have it." And good luck with that. That's crazy. It's insane. It makes no sense. Americans aren't listening to the craziness, the stupidity, and the lies that are coming out of these people's mouths. They really need to listen. But Dan, I don't think they are.
And part of it is I don't think they know, because when that's the only story that they hear, and they hear Lindsey Graham 50 times in 20 days, some of them just come to believe what he's saying without any knowledge. In the last few minutes we have here, I want to look on the other side of the pond here, and then the other side of the negotiating table for Trump on our side. and that is the Europeans, because there's going to be a big meeting tomorrow where apparently they're going to try to get Trump on the phone or on a VTC video teleconference. And you keep mentioning that issue about whoever's in the last in the room. And if I think that this was intentionally designed just 48 hours before the Trump-Putin meeting, that Europe wants to go in and try to get Trump to go to their side. Here's what they're saying. Gary, if you can put that full screen up. This is a Wall Street Journal. Europe's red lines, interesting use of that phrase here, include stressing that a ceasefire must be the first step in a deal and that any territorial exchanges must be reciprocal and based on current front lines, and that a long-term security guarantee for Ukraine, and a code for NATO. They said European leaders also plan to make a final push to persuade Trump he should allow Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and other European heads of government to participate in the meetings with Putin. I don't see any chance that any of those things would even be considered in Moscow, much less a European red line. I mean, what does that even mean?
Well, in the absence of American military power, it means nothing. And that's what President Trump needs to bear in mind. That's something he understood when I last talked to him back in November of 2020. He understood that very, very well. The Europeans can't enforce any red lines. We're the ones that are expected to enforce those red lines. We're back to American military power has to be on call to enforce red lines that the Europeans have developed for Ukraine. Think about that. Does that make sense? No, it doesn't make any sense.
Not for us.
That may be General Keene's view. That may be Lindsey Graham's view, because I don't know who they're invested in. To the point where, well, everybody on the Hill has all this insider information and makes lots of money in the stock market. Maybe they figure if this goes their way, then they'll make lots of money as a result. I don't know. I don't really care at this point. My concern is the notion that these red lines that the Europeans are devising depend entirely on enforcement from the United States Armed Forces. And specifically, as you and I both know, ultimately on the ground.
Yeah.
So I'm not interested in that. I don't want that. I don't think 99% of Americans, if you sat them down at the table and said, this is what you're expected to back, would sign up for it. We need to go back to something Trump has said. And he is right about this in one sense. He said, this is not my war. I didn't want this. He was right about that when he said it. And he's been wrong ever since he walked away from it. He needs to get back to that. And he ought to come out of this meeting, I think, with nothing, frankly, because we can't get anything. We have nothing to offer. And the Europeans are making sure that whatever he does, whatever compromise he offers, is unacceptable to them. At which point in time he needs to say, it's your show. It's not our show anymore. I'm pulling the forces out. I don't know if he sat down with anybody and figured out how much it is costing us to maintain 100,000 troops along the border with Ukraine. I don't think he understands that. I don't think he understands our investments in NATO, military and otherwise. I don't think he understands any of those costs. He's focused on this latest deal with the EU, which, by the way, von der Leyen can't even enforce. People in Europe are already balking at the tariff deal that he cut with von der Leyen. He needs to wake up and say, wait a minute, we can't be bothered with this. What are America's interests? What are our strategic interests? He should enunciate those. And if he tries to stand up in front of the American people and say, it is our strategic interest that Russia be destroyed in eastern Ukraine, he's going to be laughed off the stage. Who cares? Nobody wants anything to do with that. And by the way, I don't see hundreds of thousands of Norwegians, Swedes, Finns, Dutch, Germans, Englishmen rushing up to enlist to fight the great war in eastern Ukraine. I wouldn't hold my breath if I were Donald Trump waiting for that to happen. So his notion of you got to spend at least 5% on defense, forget it, Donald, forget it. These people aren't going to do a damn thing. He once asked me, what do you think it will take for the Germans to finally invest in their own defense and step up to the plate, so to say, and do what they need to do? And I said, we have to leave. He looked at me and he said, I think you're right. That's the truth. He needs to go back to that. Go back to the basics. He was right in 2020. He was right in his first term about everything he said regarding NATO. He needs to get back to that. This is a dead end, and he needs to turn around and get off the dead end street.
Well, and the final question I got for you here regarding Friday, what do you think the prospects are that Trump is going to accept coming away from any kind of a meeting where Putin says what all evidence indicates he's going to, which is everything I said in June of the last summer is still in a plot here. And unless you guys all withdraw from all of the 4 oblasts, the administrative borders, we're just going to keep fighting. How does Trump come away with that and not look bad, or how do you think that would affect Trump?
Well, first of all, I don't think it makes him look bad at all. Unless you are raising expectations that you are the world's greatest deal maker, and therefore whatever deal you offer ultimately has to be accepted. Now, if you're running around telling people that, you're very stupid, because that's not international relations. That's not how things work. I know that he places a lot of emphasis on his personal charm and charisma, and I think that's very nice, but I don't think it means a damn thing in state-to-state relations. How many times have you heard him say, well, I knew President Putin and I thought we had a good relationship? Well, it doesn't have anything to do with it. This is about interests. What are Russia's interests? What are our interests? Somebody says, well, wait a minute, what about Ukraine's interests? Well, those interests were sacrificed the moment that Zelensky decided to die on the battlefield, which is what 1.8 million Ukrainians have done. So that man obviously doesn't give a damn about the Ukrainian people. So I think right now the question is, if you go in there and you discover what we think is probably true, and you recognize that you're just not going to get what you want, then the real question should be, we Americans would like to normalize relations with Russia. We would like to know how you think we can proceed to do that, because in my judgment, that's important. That's the one most important thing at this stage of the game. And this is something that the neocon globalists and the rest in Washington, New York City, and the city of London do not want. They do not want a normalization of relations between ourselves and Russia. Ukraine is their permanent open sore that they will poke repeatedly and cause to bleed in the hopes that they can prevent that in perpetuity. He has to be smarter, and he has to stay. Look, we've gone as far as we can go. I, as president of the United States, can go no further. I am urging my NATO partners to sit down and talk about this, not just with Mr. Zelensky, but with President Putin, because this is a European matter to be settled by Europeans. That's what I would do. And I would get the hell out of there, along with all of our troops. There's nothing for us to do there anymore. We don't want to fight a war with Russia. The Russians know that. The Russians don't want to fight a war with us. We know that. So let's stop the charade. Let's just end it. We're good. We're leaving, And, President Zelensky and Mr. Starmer and Mr. Macron and Mr. Merz, his 3 biggest supporters, they can all sit down and huddle with him and reach some sort of conclusion regarding how they wish to proceed with Russia. But we do not want to be dragged into a war with Russia. And this whole Article 5 nonsense that commits us automatically to war with Russia has got to go away. This is the sort of stupidity that led to the First World War. Remember, we had all these alliances, the 2 alliance systems. Everything was, on hair trigger. And so suddenly war begins and everyone piles on. This sort of thing is the last thing in the world that we want. It should be the last thing in the world anybody wants. It's time to be rational, come to terms with reality, and end this thing for us. And I'll guarantee you, once we end it for us, it won't be long before the European governments turn over and change, and you get an end to this war.
Well, that can't come soon enough, and I hope that's exactly what comes out of this meeting in Alaska. The worst thing in the world could be for just the perpetuation of the war and the extension of the suffering of the Ukrainian people. We'll just have to watch and see what happens, and I hope that the President Trump has the courage and the wisdom to make the decisions that you suggest.
We'll see.
I guess we'll see. We will. And thank you very much, though, for coming on. And as always, loved talking with you. And then all these things you can illuminate for us in ways that most people don't in television in America today. And we appreciate you guys coming on and joining us today as well. We always appreciate you. I ask you to like and subscribe if you haven't done that. Also, to remind you, let your friends know that if they prefer to get their information via podcast and on audio, they can go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podcast Addict, type in Daniel Davis Deep Dive, and they will find us there. We're also on the written format now with DanielDavisDeepDive.substack.com. You can also go there because a lot of your friends may like it in the written form. We want to make sure that the kind of truth and the deep analysis, the accurate analysis that you're getting on shows like this, make sure your friends get access to it as well, because they'll appreciate you for it. Thank you very much. We'll see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.
Sweet.